This morning I'd like to read in Lamentations chapter 3. Lamentations chapter 3, the first 3 verses. I am the man who has seen affliction under the rod of his wrath. He has driven and brought me into darkness without any light. Surely against me he turns his hand again and again the whole day long. Most people that you would call biblical scholars think that probably the prophet Jeremiah wrote the book of Lamentations, but the truth is his name isn't actually on the book as the author, so we're not 100% certain who wrote this book. But whoever wrote it, it was written during a terrible time in the history of God's people. It was written after the Babylonians had come in and invaded the land of Judah, and they had pretty much destroyed the city of Jerusalem. They had broken through the walls, they had destroyed the temple, and then they began killing people as well. And by the time they were finished, there were tens of thousands of Jewish people who had died at the hands of the Babylonians. And so once you know the history, once you know why this book was written and when it was written, you can imagine, understandably, that Lamentations is an incredibly sad book to read. It just goes on for verse after verse and chapter after chapter about how terrible life had become, how painful life had become for the Jewish people, how everything had fallen apart. And for so many people, understandably, there seemed to be no hope at all for the future. And I believe that part of the reason the Holy Spirit led me to this passage this morning is because, in a sense, it's similar to what some of you are feeling right now. And to be honest, I wonder if maybe more than a few of you are feeling this way. I wonder if there are several of you who are hurting in this way. You're at that point in your life where you're looking for hope, but you're not feeling much at all. Some of you, I think, have probably been praying for a miracle or for something to take place in your life, but God doesn't seem to be answering your prayers. And you're starting to wonder whether you would say this out loud or not. You're starting to wonder if maybe God is against you, just like the writer said in verse 3 that we just read. Surely against me he turns his hand again and again the whole day long. We just talked about our brother Rick Lang going to be with the Lord and what his family is going through right now. There have been a lot of people in similar situations, even this last year in our church. I think of the Hippolito and Ruiz family, and not just the fact that they went through 1 or 2 deaths. They had 8 deaths in the last year in their very close family. And that's hard to imagine what it has to be like to experience that. I know that there are people in our church who this last year suddenly, without any warning, lost a job. And to go from feeling secure and feeling like you can make it even in tough times to suddenly not having any income at all, that is a very stressful moment. And you understand what it must feel like to think, what did I do wrong? Is God against me? Where did I mess up that God is allowing this into my life? Again, you may not have said it, but a lot of you have probably thought that. Why am I experiencing this kind of pain? Whatever the loss you've been through, whatever has been taken away from you, that pain, that sense of suffering can be overwhelming, and it's easy for us to find ourselves in a place where we're searching for any answer at all. We're searching for any kind of hope at all, something to get a hold of, but it seems to be just beyond our reach. And so that's why I began with those verses from the book of Lamentations. The reality is, of course, I'm not a psychologist, and I don't make any pretensions to be an effective counselor. I'm really not that great of a counselor. But this idea of lament, lamentations, the word lament, it's a theme in the Bible. It's present throughout Scripture. And when you understand what it is and how it works, it can help you to know how to respond to times of suffering and deprivation in your own life. Now, if you've been part of the church for any significant amount of time, you know there are a couple different passages that I come back to again and again, and I particularly like the passages that remind us that God is constantly leading us. So you've probably, unless you're relatively new to the church, you've probably heard me read Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Let me read it to you, and you'll recognize it. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." And that's a wonderful, wonderful passage. And then along with it, I love to read Romans 8:28. "We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose." And because they're in the Bible, those verses, those passages are true. I believe them 100%. But at the same time, I know that when you're in the middle of a crisis, it's like your life is turned into a whirlpool and you're being sucked down into the deep waves. It's hard to believe Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. It's hard to believe that God's actually leading you. And when you're trapped in a pit of despair and you don't see any way out, it can be hard to quote Romans 8:28 and see how God is working all things together for your good. And if you've ever been trapped in that despair, that sense of hopelessness, sometimes someone will come along and they'll actually make it worse. And it's not because they don't want to help. Somebody will see what you're going through and they want to help you get through it. But in their efforts to help you move on, sometimes what they will do, they'll try to get you to move forward too fast before you're ready. Sometimes a well-meaning person will come up to you and see what you're going through, and they'll say something like this: "Well, you know, God has a reason for everything, and you just need to walk by faith." Okay. Sometimes they'll say, "You know, God never gives you more than you can bear, and so you're going to be okay." And in the larger picture, those are true statements. But just because a statement is true doesn't mean it's necessarily helpful in that moment. Sometimes you might not be ready to move forward. Sometimes, given the intensity of what you're going through and the struggle that you're in, sometimes you first need to wrestle with what it is that you're feeling. And so you want to be careful. You want to be Spirit-led. You want to pray about it before you just walk up to somebody who's in a crisis and you say, "Hey, all things work together for good." Maybe that's not the passage to share in that moment. Maybe that person needs to hear something else from the Bible, a passage that reminds them that even for those who love God, life can be very, very difficult. For example, let me read to you in Psalm 13, a passage that King David wrote during a particularly difficult time in his life. Here's what he said, Psalm 13, verses 1 and 2. "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me?" Passages like this, and there are many of them, are called passages of lament. And they're in the Bible for a reason, and that's because every person goes through pain. When you read the Bible, even the great heroes of the faith, the people that did such amazing things for God, they went through times of struggle. But one of the things that made them unique is that they knew through their experience with God how to process that pain and struggle in a spiritually healthy way. And that's in the Bible what the word lament means. It's not the same thing as feeling sad. It's not the same thing as just feeling miserable and talking about it. In the Bible, the word lament means to bring your sorrow to God and seek his help in working through it. So you express it to him, but at the same time you seek his help. Because the alternative is this: If we don't go to God, we're going to allow eventually bitterness and even anger to become dominant emotions in our lives. And eventually bitterness and anger will destroy us, and we've seen it. Some of us have experienced it. So the point I'm simply making is this. On the one hand, we need to be very honest about what we're going through. We need to admit it openly. But on the other hand, we don't want to get trapped there forever. Because we've all seen people who are caught on one side or the other. I've met people, and so have you, and maybe you've been this person. They're going through something really, really bad, and you ask them, how are you doing? And, oh, I'm fine. They ignore their pain. They deny it. They throw some cliche on it. Oh, yeah. But you know as well as I do, it's going to come out eventually, one way or another. It always does. And if you ignore it now, you're going to reap that harvest in the future. But then on the other side, you meet people that you go up, how are you doing? And they're very honest, they're very open about their struggles. But they never seem to be able to move forward. They live there. Months, years down the road, they're still there. How are you doing? Oh, it's terrible. They get trapped. And so what we need to look for is a biblical model that helps us to discover balance. And that's why the idea of lament in the scriptures, lament is so important, because it's a healthy way for us to wrestle with our pain. You see, in the Bible, lamenting isn't just expressing sadness. Lamenting also involves being determined to move forward with God. So let's stay in Psalm 13, and I want to go back and reread those verses I read just a moment ago. And this is David talking about something he's going through. Look at verses 1 and 2 again. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? So you don't need me to tell you, interpret anything here. It's obvious. These are words of deep sadness. There's no secret hidden message in the Hebrew. It says what it says. David is being honest about what he's feeling. His life is miserable. His feelings are about as low as they can be. But what turns this passage from just an expression of sadness into biblical lament is that David doesn't stop and just focus on the pain. He does tell God he's sad, but he doesn't just tell God that he's sad. He also asks God to help him in his struggle. Go to verse 3 and 4. Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say I have prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. And that right there, those two verses, that's one of the things that makes biblical lament different from the practice so many of us have of just wallowing in our misery, right? It's so easy for me, and probably for most of you, it's so easy for me to just dwell on my unhappiness until it becomes the only thing I'm capable of doing. Tell me I'm the only one. Whereas biblical lament allows us to express our pain to God while also asking him to do something about it. And then lament does something else. It expresses gratitude or thankfulness to God even before the answer to our problem arrives, in advance. And the reason we can express gratitude before we see the answer is because of what we know God has done for us in the past. That's in verses 5 and 6. David says, I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. Now watch verse 6. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. So it's clear. David is looking forward. I will sing to the Lord. I'm going to worship you, God. Why? Because of God's past faithfulness. I will sing to the Lord because he has in the past dealt bountifully with me. That's the reason you can Trust God in whatever you're going through right now. It's not necessarily that you know exactly what He's going to do. In fact, if you're like most of us, you probably have no idea. It's simply that you have seen His care for you in the past, and His past mercy and grace can give you hope for the future. And so we're actually going to spend the next, some weeks, I don't know how long it'll last, in a series talking about biblical lament. And here's my goal. For those who are struggling, I want to talk about some healthy ways for you to take these feelings to God and how doing it in the right way can actually help you. And I also want you to see that contrary to what some Christian teachers and preachers have said, expressing sadness and suffering is not a lack of faith. It isn't. Suffering and sadness are actually things that if we channel them in a biblically healthy way, God can use them to help us to grow. And so just because you admit the truth about what you're going through doesn't mean you don't love God, doesn't mean you don't have faith. It means you're being honest. And God can take your honesty and He can use it to move you forward in the right direction. Now, you know that in our church we love to sing about the joy of the Lord, and we sing songs of victory. You go before I know that you've gone out to fight my war. We just sang that a few moments ago. God goes ahead of me and fights my battles. You know that I love to preach about the goodness and the mercy of God. And He is good and He is merciful. But that doesn't mean that our lives are always easy. That doesn't mean that we don't struggle. And so one of my goals is that we're going to be able to be honest about the things we're feeling, about the things that are happening in our hearts and in our minds. But at the same time, we're gonna look for healing from God. And it's not wrong for a Christian to feel sadness and sorrow, even for an extended period. If you were going through what Diana is going through right now, she's going to be sad for a long time. Some of you understand that. But ultimately what we're asking is for God to bring us through the time of lament, to bring us to a renewed level of faith in Him where we are reminded of His goodness even in the hard times. And you see, it is possible for both of these things to be true at the same time. It is possible for you as a Christian who loves Jesus to feel sadness and even to be overwhelmed with despair. But at the same time, even while you're feeling these things, it is also possible for you to turn to God and express your hope that He will turn your pain into renewed faith. And the book of Lamentations actually perfectly illustrates how these seemingly opposite concepts can actually exist together in the same person at the same time. Let me show you. In Lamentations chapter 3, one more time, let me read the verses we read at the beginning, verses 1 through 3. The writer says, I am the man who has seen affliction under the rod of His wrath. He has driven and brought me into darkness without any light. Surely against me He turns His hand again and again the whole day long. That was what he was feeling. He wasn't lying. He's saying, I'm miserable. My country's been destroyed. People I know are lying dead in the streets. And then just a few verses later, the same writer says this, verse 22. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Those words are so beautiful. They've been turned into a song. I remember growing up in church singing that song. I'll never forget it. And in a sense, learning to live with the tension between the suffering and heartache of today and the hope of a better tomorrow, living with that tension is part of what it means to trust God. On the one hand, we're living in a sinful world, and because of that, our lives are filled with pain and struggle. But at the same time, we believe, we know that God is our strength, and we also believe, we know that He has something better for us. And so in our moments of suffering, and I'm almost done, and then Cheryl's going to actually come and close our service. In our moments of suffering, that's where biblical lament becomes incredibly important. God does not expect us to deny reality. If someone asks you how you're doing, you can tell them the truth. And you certainly ought to tell God the truth because He knows anyway. It's okay to come to Him and admit your struggles. But even though you admit your brokenness, you do so with the knowledge that He is both powerful and loving, and that as you pour yourself out to Him, He will prove Himself faithful. And you will find His grace. And that it will be enough.